Hello everybody, this is a deck that I call Rogue Killer. That's because I designed this deck for a tournament where I knew I was playing against a rogue player, and I knew that I had to run a hunter hero. So my idea was that rogues like to use a lot of high cost weapons and high cost allies, so I would combine resource destruction with a deck that used a lot of abilities rather than items, because rogues like to destroy items. So in this tournament, I'm playing against a fellow guildmate, BT Sig, who is the world champion of Shadow Era from 2018. So going into this match, I was pretty nervous, and I tried voice recording while I was playing, but it was a little bit difficult. So that's why I'm voice recording after the fact. So hopefully I can talk a little bit about how I played some of these cards and what my strategy was. So yeah, the hero I'm running is Banebow. Banebow deals 2 damage to 2 different allies or heroes. So that's really helpful because rogues run a lot of allies that have low health, such as Night Owl, which only has 2 health. So Banebow really helps control the board in the early game. And the purpose of this deck is to prevent the opponent from ever getting to the late game in the first place. And to do that, you've got cards like Tactician, which increase the cost to play items by 1, and I just drew into Here Be Monsters, which is a card that removes one of your opponent's resources if they have equal resources to yours or more resources than you do. So that really helps because Sig is running a deck that has a lot of high-cost allies, and if he can never get to 7 resources, then he can never summon them. So that really helps me control the board in the early game, and also prevent them or Sig from getting to the late game. So right now I am sacking Will to Fight, which is usually a late game card. And now I've got an interesting decision between Wolven Scout and the other Wolven card. Wolven Scout lets you see your opponent's hand, so I go for it because I kind of want to see what Sig has in store. Sig is running a card called Yahari, which is a location that exiles all of your allies that are less than, or are 3 resources or less. So I need to watch out for that, because if Sig draws into that, then I do not want to be spamming allies on the board, because then Sig can just exile all of them. So here I draw into Tactician, which is really good because, as you can see in Sig's hand, are 2 ankle breakers. So I know that he really wants to summon them, and by summoning Tactician here, I'm preventing Sig from summoning them because now they cost 6 instead of 5 resources. And I didn't talk about this earlier, but Wolven Trader is the 2cc ally, has 1 attack and 3 health, and it lets you draw a card every time you summon a Wolven ally, but it happens at the end of the turn, so it can be really good for getting card advantage here. So this turn, I believe I make a mistake. So I see Sig's hand, and I know that he can't possibly play Ankle Breaker, but I end up using the location here. So the location is a very key card in the deck, but I think it was the wrong call to play here, because locations are cards that give your opponent an ability as well as give you an ability. So while the location lets you summon an attachment for 3 resources less, it also lets your opponent make one of your allies lose its abilities. So Sig here is going to make a very brilliant play by using the location ability that I gave him to negate Tactician's effect and summon Ankle Breaker, which is a huge tempo play for him. And if I had not played the location, I think he would have had to waste this turn, essentially. Especially since I have another Tactician in hand. But now that he has summoned the Ankle Breaker, the lock has been lost, essentially. But that's no matter, since I still control the board, so it's not the end of the world yet. And I've still got a lot of play here. So right now I am trying to play a little bit carefully, because Sig has a armor called Black Garb, and what that does is if I attack Sig with an ally, then that ally is killed if it deals damage. So I ideally want to be hitting Sig with an ally that only has one attack, because then it won't be killed from Black Garb. Here though, I realize that I've lost the lock, so I better start, start dealing damage. So here I decide that even though I could end my turn, it's worth it to have one of my allies die in order to break Black Garb. Another thing that led to that decision was the fact that I had no one-attack allies on my field, so I would be waiting a long time before I attacked if I didn't go ahead and attack that turn. So as you can see, this deck has a lot of draw power. With Banebow, you have a lot of control options, and that helps your cards survive early on, like Woven Trader, which is a very key card to getting your draw engine going. Then you've got cards like Confluence of Fate, which let you draw cards for attachments you summon. And since this is such an attachment-heavy deck, you can really start drawing a lot of cards. So now my Sig is on 6 resources, so he's able to start summoning cards like Visca. Visca is a good card, but it has haste, which is what makes it so good. Basically, it can attack on the turn it's summoned. And it's also got a very strong 3 attack, so I have to go ahead and kill it right now. So this is another card that's really good in this deck. It's called Hunter's Gambit. It's an attachment that costs 3, and with the location it doesn't cost anything. So what I did there is I used the location to make the attachment free. And here I could have played 2 traders, but I decided not to because I saw with Woven Scout that Sig had a Yahari in hand, which means that had I played those 2 Woven Traders, Sig would have likely exiled them with Yahari's ability, which again is that location that lets you spend 4 Shadow Energy to exile all allies that cost 3 or less on the field. And now that I only have 3 CC allies, or 3 resource allies on the field, it's not as worth it for him to play Yahari right now, because my ability for Yahari is that I get to remove it from play by paying 2 Shadow Energy, and then I get to draw 2 cards. So he doesn't want to play Yahari unless if he's going to get good value out of it. So he goes ahead and plays this card called Oliver Fagin. And that card lets you take one of your opponent's allies that cost 3 resources or less and put it in your hand. So otherwise it's got relatively low stats, but it can get really, really huge really quickly because it gets 1 attack for every card in your hand. So like recently it just had 6 attack, which is a lot of attack for a 7 resource ally. So it can be really good tempo-wise, and also is just a threat you have to deal with. I didn't really talk about Lance, but Lance's ability lets you give an ally stealth and haste, which is really, really strong because it can result in big tempo swings. And that's why Lance likes to use very high-cost allies, because that ability is better if the ally you're hasting is better. Anyway, here I make the decision not to sacrifice a card, because I want to keep the option open to use Here Be Monsters to remove a resource from Sig. And there was really no need for me to have an additional resource this turn. That being said, I think I probably could have sacrificed a card, because that would have let me draw in 2 more cards. As right now I am basically at the resource cap, which is not really good because you want to be drawing cards whenever you can. But in the end, it's not that big of a deal because I'm still able to get rid of Oliver Fagin. And I do that with Woven Predator. Its ability is just that it can attack stealthed allies, which is really helpful in this matchup because Lance gives allies stealth. And it was able to attack the turn I summoned it with Will to Fight, which is an attachment that costs 3 resources, but it gives one of your allies haste. So right now, Sig only has 10 health, so I am really looking for a way to quickly close out the game. Hopefully, I can deal enough damage next turn to win, or if not, the turn after that. Because if things keep going at this rate, especially since Sig has ill-gotten gains and now has enough resources to play all his fatty allies, it will be tough to keep the board for very long anyway, and once Sig regains the board, it is very hard for this deck to regain the board presence. So I either want to close the game really quickly or try and hold on to the board for as long as possible. So one way to hold on to the board is to spam enough allies to the point where Sig can't possibly kill all of them. And the idea here is that he'll kill 1 or 2 of my allies, but as long as some of them are still on the board, I can maybe boost their attack and still attack with them, so that I could possibly still deal enough damage to win the game next turn. So here, Sig is in a very tricky situation. He goes for killing Wildfane, but I think this one is pretty much in the bag here. I don't think there's much Sig could have done at this point. As rogues, one of the weaknesses of rogues is that if you spam the board with allies, they can't really respond to it very effectively, because once you spam the board with allies, then they don't have a board clear. So, oh, and I got very lucky here, which by drawing into Dark Riding Hood, which I didn't need because of Banebow's ability, but Dark Riding Hood is another way to give my allies attack. It gives all my allies 1 attack, so it can be very good, especially in this deck where I'm relying on finishing the game before it gets to the late game. So yeah, but as I was saying, rogues lack a card that lets them clear the board, so that spamming allies is usually very safe against rogues. So this is game 2, and in this game I'm going first. Now usually decks like to go first, but actually I would say that this is a deck that can go second very comfortably, and that's because of Here Be Monsters and the fact that it's against rogues. Because rogues usually don't have a very strong turn 2 play. Usually they'll just play an artifact, and in Sig's case, in his deck, he doesn't play anything on turn 2 really. So it's totally fine to go second, because I can have my lock started by the time that it is turn 3, and use Here Be Monsters to really control the early game. So it's not so important to go first. Here I also draw into Trader, which is really, really nice. You always want to be seeing Trader, and Trader is, if you don't draw into it, it's hard to get your draw engine going. So here I go for Scout again instead of the other ally. And the reason why is because I want to see what Sig has in his hand, and here he has Yahari. So I have to be very careful about playing allies here, because Sig could easily, Sig could easily use Yahari to exile all of them. So here I use Here Be Monsters because I look at his hand and see that he has nothing that costs 3 resources. So now here I notice that he has 3 Shadow Energy, so next turn he'll be able to use Yahari. And if he uses Yahari, he'll be able to kill both of my allies. So if they're gonna die anyway, I might as well kill Scout by running it into Black Garb. And I decided to eke out a little bit of extra damage by playing Lapnir here and using Relentless Savagery to give Scout 5 attack. This might have been a mistake, It's hard to know because who knows how the game would have gone if I played differently, but it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if I kind of held off on that, because I didn't need to do that this early in the game, and maybe forced Sig to use Yahari, because that way I could have drawn a bunch of extra cards and I wouldn't have to play Lakmir so early. One of the problems with playing Lakmir early is that, as Sig smartly does in this game, he uses it against me to make my allies lose their abilities. And another part of this game is me being very careful, because I don't want to let him use Yahari. So it might have been a good idea to get Yahari out of the way, if you know what I mean by that. That being said, it's still nice that Sig has to be using one Shadow Energy every turn to be negating my allies' abilities, because that is one less card, or sorry, one less Shadow Energy for him to use later in the game. So here Sig is still on 2 resources, so he still can't summon anything, and I think that really shows how powerful this and oppressive this deck can be, because it means that he's just never going to get a chance to play anything until much later in the game, where I've already built up a bunch of Shadow Energy and a strong board presence. So here I go for Tactician. Tactician is really nice here because it's going to make any items he plays, like Ill-Gotten Gains, cost 1 more, so that his turn play here now is going to be a little bit weaker. I think he will play, he plays Tainted Oracle, if I recall correctly, which is a good call in this part, because it puts me in an awkward position where I don't want to kill it because I don't want Sig to draw cards, but if I let it live, then he'll maybe be able to use it to try and control the board. So yeah, Sig uses the location again to make my ally lose 2 attack, and its abilities, which is pretty relevant here. I am really needing some draw. I didn't draw into a lot of good draw options this game, and with Sig negating Trader every turn, it's really hard for me to draw cards. So this was really well played on Sig's part, and it's making me have to make this awkward decision this turn, where I really don't want to be playing low-cost allies because I know Sig has Yahari. At the same time, though, I really need to draw cards, so I go ahead and do that anyway. Now here, I think I make another mistake. I think I should have let the Tainted Oracle live, because Tainted Oracle on 2 attack can't kill any of my allies. So it was pretty much harmless, and I can use Banebo's ability to kill it at any time. So this was kind of a mistake, and it lets Sig draw into the cards he needs to counter my board, as you'll see in just 1 second. So yeah, I should have definitely let Tainted Oracle live and held off on using Banebo's ability. So yeah, Sig uses Yahari to exile all of my allies, and then uses Dahlia Black Rose, which is a very good card against this deck, because Trader is easy to counter with allies. And Dahlia lets you discard a weapon and then kill an ally that has lower cost than the weapon. So that just killed my Tactician, which really sucks for my board control, and forces me into this hard position where I really want to use Yahari to draw cards, but instead I go for playing the location so that I can try and regain board control, and hope that my my Dark Riding Hood survives, so that I can start drawing cards using Dark Riding Hood's ability. I think this was probably a mistake again, because I probably should have expected another ankle breaker, because Sig probably runs 4 of them, so it was kind of risky to gamble my entire draw engine on that 1 card. So I am kind of lucky here by drawing Here Be Monsters, but it's not enough to get my draw going. So I'm kind of dead in the water for now, which is going to really help Sig because it's going to let him get the resources he needs to turn this game around. So even though it looks like Sig only has 11 health, this is a very dangerous situation for me, and I am very uncomfortable because I have no way to draw cards, and Sig can start playing fatties now. He also has Ankle Breaker, which is very deadly for me because it's going to make it that much harder to get the board control. So here I decide to play a passive turn, mostly because I can't really do anything, and just summon an attachment for the future. So I think one of the things I could have done better in this game is maybe try and anticipate this more and focus more on drawing cards earlier in the game, whereas I kind of did that too late this game, and it's really hurting me now because I'm spending turns doing nothing basically, while Sig is summoning very scary monsters and allies to his field that are going to just help him control the board that much more. And so, even though I was at full health just a couple of turns ago, Sig is already dealing a huge chunk of damage to me. And one of the things about Lance is you cannot let your health get too low, because Lance gives allies haste. And some of the allies in the deck can deal a ton of damage. So, so the problem with, I guess, having low health is that Lance can just win the game out of nowhere, basically, by playing his Shadow ability on an ally. So, this game is looking very unlikely for me, and basically I just have to rely on being able to win out of nowhere by using Will to Fight to maybe deal enough damage to win the game. Unfortunately, I'm going to lose next turn if I don't do something, so instead of going and using the hero ability of Banebow to hit the hero, I'm instead going to do it to clear the board a little bit and hopefully survive another turn. And the other benefit of this is I finally get to draw cards from Hunter's Gambit, which I played on Braxinarian Soldier a while ago. Another reason I have to kill Braxinarian Soldier is the fact that it prevents allies I play from getting haste, which is basically the only chance I win the game at this point. So here I'm going to draw into Wolven Scout, which is really good. So I have a couple decisions here, and I go to play Wolven Scout just to see what Sig has. And it looks like another Ankle Breaker, so while I would have normally used Will to Fight here to get rid of that card, by I think it was the right choice here to kind of hold off on that. Or actually, I think I do use Will to Fight here because of the fact that Sig has Yahari, so it's going to probably die anyway, and I might as well use it. So that just puts me a little bit closer, but it's not enough to get into damage or to a range where I can win the game. So it's looking like Sig will get this game here. So yeah, Sig is an extremely good player, and actually taught me the game when I was just beginning. So if you've noticed, he's in the same guild as me, and he's actually our guild leader. So so I guess in some ways he's taught me how to play the game, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, he's probably one of the best, if not the best player. And as I said earlier in the introduction, he won the World Championships of Shadow Era earlier this year. Or actually last year, I guess, since it's 2019 already. So, and here I don't have many options, so I can't really get rid of that ally since it has stealth, and Yahari is blocking my ability to use attachments for free, so there was basically no chance But as you can see, it was a pretty close game, so I think it could have gone a different way potentially if I had played a little bit differently here and there. So that kind of, I guess, shows how oppressive this deck can be, because even when Sig won, it was by a small margin, and it was a very well-fought game. So as I said earlier, I constructed this deck specifically to counter Sig. I was expecting Lance, and I knew that it would have a lot of fat allies that cost a lot, and that I would be able to use that to my advantage by preventing him from ever being able to play those high-cost allies. So I'm actually really impressed that Sig was able to pull off that victory in the last game, because this deck is designed to stop that. So here I draw into Assumed Command, which is the third card from the left, and that card is my counter to Yahari. I didn't draw it in the earlier games, which was really unfortunate, even though I run 2 copies, but it basically says that all your allies gain Steadfast, and that really helps, because that's basically Sig's only chance of preventing me from dominating in the early game, and as you'll see, I can play it next turn to really strong effect. And Sig does get kind of unlucky here with basically no cards that cost under 5 resources, so there's basically nothing he can do at this point in time. And I've got 2 Here Be Monsters in hand, so this deck, or this hand, is already looking really strong. So here, Sig would have played Yahari, but again, he knows I have Assumed Command, and that would actually only help me because it would let me draw cards. So he can't really play Yahari either, and now he's just kind of stuck because he's got nothing he can play, and now he's back down to 3 resources, so he's gotta just hope he draws into a 3 resource card at this point. And I think he does, but it is still a little bit late because I've already established my board, and at this point Sig is just playing catch up because there's nothing he can do at this point in time. So here I would normally not sacrifice a card because that would mean I wouldn't be able to use Here Be Monsters, and that would just let Sig play a 5-cost ally and then haste it, which will be really bad for me because it would let him potentially regain control of the game. That being said, I run this card called Shriek of Revulsion, and what that does is it means you lose one of your resources when you play the card. So that way I can still play Here Be Monsters and sacrifice a card this turn, which is kind of nice. Now here, Hunter's Gambit is a very excellent card, but I sacrifice it. And the reason I do it is because it's not good when your opponent isn't playing allies, and in this case, my opponent can't play allies, so it is really helping. It is really not helping in this case, because I won't be able to ever play it. And here I go and use Mark of the Feared. Usually I wouldn't use Mark of the Feared on my own allies. It's usually a card you play on your opponent's allies to make them lose 3 health. But it also can be used as an aggro card, like I just used it for there, because it gives an ally 3 attack as well. So now I have a really strong card, and this basically means that if Sig doesn't do something this turn, I'm going to have this game in the bag. And Sig can't do anything because he only has 4 resources. And I draw into Dark Riding Hood, which means I can seal this game right now. So yeah, this was kind of, I mean, I wouldn't play this deck unless you absolutely know you're going against rogues, because this deck can struggle against more aggro-based builds. It's very hard to control the board once you lose it, so it's not really well suited to a mid-range, to playing against other mid-range or control decks. I hope you found this video informative, and maybe maybe it helped give you an idea of what the Shadow Era competitive scene looks like. There's a lot of tournaments like this. This one was the tag team tournament, but there's many more. And if you want to learn more about them, you should join the Telegram chat where the community hosts a bunch of more tournaments. Anyways, thanks for watching.